Fallout 4 honestly doesn't have that much cut content when compared to some of the previous Fallouts, or at least not as much of it has come forward for us to consume. With that being said, there's still quite a few things going on behind the scenes that you may have never known about, some features that were initially implemented into the game but later removed, with their source files still being there in the remnants. This is actually a video I asked you guys about making. You voted on Twitter, and I think it's something I'm going to do a little bit more often, so if you want to follow me on Twitter and vote in some of these polls, get some of these videos created, you can find a link to that down below. But either way, as I did mention, today I'm going to be showing you 10 pieces of cut content from Fallout 4. This is going to be ranging from some pretty massive aspects of cut content to some more minor things and other things that are just kind of gameplay mechanics that probably would have had a pretty big impact over the course of a playthrough. This video is also going to be sponsored by Amazon. At the top of the description down below, you're actually going to find a link to where you could search for textbooks. If you're like me, you probably just jumped into college, know a lot of people in the next few weeks are going to be starting off. Amazon actually has a great repository of both new and used textbooks, and that's used physical copies of textbooks that you can get oftentimes for highly discounted. Even beyond that, you could rent an ebook or things like that. 9 times out of 10, Amazon has been cheaper in my experience when compared to my university bookstore. Yeah, the video is sponsored by them, but even as an aside, I've been using this for quite a few years now. I love renting ebooks on Amazon because you get it instantly, and typically it's very cheap when compared to getting a physical copy. Again, you're going to find a link to that down below. You could search the title of the textbook, the ISBN number, and check out some of those different options you will have as far as getting one. In Fallout 4, there's actually a few different types of elemental damage. This is largely populated through the legendary system that we do have in the game. A lot of the times when looking at individual armor pieces, you could actually see the default resistances, as well as some of those more special kinds, that's your energy resistance, as well as other kinds of projectiles you can find in the game. Well, something you may have not known is this system used to be quite a bit more expansive. Right now you do just have your typical damage resistance. You also do have radiation resistance for things like a gamma gun or just flat out radiation, but oftentimes you also see an energy category. This used to not be a thing. It was actually separated into standalone categories, that being cryo as well as fire. Despite the fact that there are pieces of cryo as well as fire equipment throughout the game, these are actually just going to be categorized into the energy resistance category. It's a fairly minor change when you actually look at it. I mean, you probably would have just had another armor edition or things like that, and it seems like Bethesda wanted to simplify things. But at the same time, especially at the earlier parts of the game, going up against something like the Forge would have required a pretty specific armor type. A default energy resistance like you find in the game right now probably wouldn't benefit you nearly as much, and I imagine armor overall would have just received a bit of a nerf. This is actually one I've talked a little bit about in a previous video, but I'll mention it quickly here. Basically, there was a system in Fallout 4, or at least in some of the early builds, where at some point after doing a certain amount of quest for one of the corresponding factions within the game, you would be able to get faction-specific perks. This is an incomplete system. Right now we only have a few perks for the Brotherhood of Steel, as well as the Railroad. One example is the Initiate perk for the Brotherhood of Steel. You would take 10% less damage from feral ghouls, super mutants, and synths. Then there's also a Knight, a Paladin, as well as the Railroad has a Secret Agent, Station Master, and the Heavy perk. So it seems like probably as you ranked up and did more quests for each of these subsequent factions, you would get some more of these subsequent perks. It's not really clear how you would have got them. I imagine you would have probably got them as like a quest reward perhaps. I doubt it had to actually be a perk point you spent. But either way, I felt like this was really cool. I love this idea, especially if you like really focus down on one of the factions. It would give you more rewards as well as more options and opportunity costs associated with some of those decisions. Like, yeah, I mean, there's a few things right now in Fallout 4 that you can get by siding with each subsequent faction, but it's normally only like one major thing, and that's a corresponding piece of equipment. If you side with the Brotherhood of Steel, you do get those awesome vertibirds that you can fly around with. If it's the Minutemen, you do get the flare. If it's the synths, you get the relays. Either way, I feel like this would have been another cool thing to really divvy up these factions, and I'm kind of disappointed it didn't make it into the game. So with this one, we're actually fortunate enough to have a mod that pretty much totally restores it, but previously, the combat zone in Fallout 4 was supposed to be way more interactive. The mod is kind of in a rough state. It's definitely usable. I've used it in a playthrough before, and you definitely could download it and experience it yourself, but basically, as you're kind of seeing in the background, the combat zone at one point in time was meant to be a place that you could go and actually fight others yourself and make bets on some of those fights, whether it be to random people or you against someone else. You were supposed to opening by actually being someone that was fighting Kate and having bets placed on you. You weren't going to be instantly aggroed to all the raiders, and it seemed like a really cool idea, but I imagine this is going to be one of the best well-known out of the cut content, so I'll be pretty brief with this one. So it's actually a fairly small piece. We only have a snippet of one of the animations going on, but it seems like Fallout 4 was supposed to have somewhat a system for destructible environments, or at least these would be pre-scripted events that maybe a quest event would trigger. Either way, this is a little snippet we do have. This is something you could find within the game files, and more or less it seems like there's kind of a doorway being collapsed on by a bunch of different rocks. There's a few more of these within the game files, and obviously we don't really know what they're going to be used for. There's no intended usage within those same files, but either way, it seems like something that could have been really cool to make some of those really memorable and pivotal experiences within the game even more memorable. I imagine a lot of people remember blowing up the Institute in Fallout 4 because of how awesome that scripted event is. Same thing with that giant flying pirate ship. When you actually do that, you really remember it because it's totally different. It's not something you've seen done in the game thus far, and it's just really interesting. Having a few more of these, especially maybe on a smaller scale with some of these destructible environments, I feel like would have been really cool and really brought you back into the story, which Fallout 4 definitely had a few problems with. One thing Fallout 4 didn't really innovate a ton in the area of was new NPCs. A lot of the content and enemies you do find within the game are things you did see in some of the previous iterations of this franchise. With that being said, that doesn't mean they didn't have anything in the works. Obviously, in Nuka World, we got quite a few variations of some of our well-known NPCs, but it seems like there was actually one more thing they were working on. I really only found one iteration or article linking or talking about this while I was doing the research for this video, but more or less they call this a Wraith. As you can see, it looks very similar to a super mutant. I don't know if it actually was meant to be a super mutant or a Wraith as they call it. They don't really give any more details outside of that. But either way, it definitely looks like something that would be pretty daunting. It seems like the skin isn't as kind of human-like as a super mutant, but actually a bit more of an elephant-like skin or scaly, maybe like an alligator of sorts. Obviously, textures were done for this. It kind of looks like a ghoul crossed with a super mutant of sorts, something that definitely would be interesting in the game and, you know, something that has actually appeared for some of the other creatures. Another one of the things I have covered in the past is actually the underwater portions of cut content that were supposed to be in Fallout 4. If you look at the Commonwealth, you'll quickly realize that there's actually a vast amount of ocean that is pretty much totally unused. Whether it was for time constraints, budget cuts, or whatever, Fallout 4 actually had a lot more content that was supposed to be here but was removed. One such thing was an underwater vault as well as the associated quest. There's even a squid and squid textures to go along with it. We don't really know all that much about it. What we do know is that you are supposed to go over to the sea portions on this quest and actually search for and hopefully get into an underwater vault. Some of the stuff that you actually could get through Far Harbor, like the harpoon equipment as well as some of these spears, were actually intended to be available with this part of the main game, but it seems like they were pushed back maybe for Far Harbor. Unfortunately, in Far Harbor, we never actually got an underwater vault, as cool as that would have been. But you know, the remedies, the ideas are still there in Fallout 4, and it's hopefully something we'll see in the next game or through a mod. I kind of mentioned it with the underwater vault, but to go along with that, there was also supposed to be a giant squid that would inhabit the ocean. If you travel through Fallout 4, you'll quickly realize that we are surely lacking things to inhabit the ocean. Again, it's a vast ocean that is largely empty with nothing to do. Fortunately, there's actually a few mods that will add in a few fishies or enemies here that you can explore, loot, get some food if you're playing on survival. But we also had textures for a giant squid as well as a ghoul variant of that squid, which is pretty insane. Through some of the file names, it seems like that the way you were supposed to discover and actually uncover the squid was through that vault. So maybe you had a quest associated with going to the vault, but then after you got in it, you would actually look through one of the windows and see a giant squid swimming around. Maybe that would have been requirements for the entry into the vault. Invariably, something that was underwater would be largely untouched by some of the bombs falling, as well as probably be a pretty preserved location, or really destroyed, one or the other. Either way, there's just a ton of cool possibilities here. I mean, again, as I kind of mentioned on the last one, there's a lot of water in Fallout 4 and a lot of potential that was definitely not taken advantage of. Fallout 4 actually had a ton of extra rudimentary equipment that just wasn't added into the game. Things that probably would have populated some of those lower level raiders and just some of the earlier enemies you do encounter. Such things as a crossbow, javelins, and tomahawk. Some of these are actually in the game files in their completion, and there are mods bringing them back into the game. There's other mods out there that are adding in snippets of this, like Crossbows of the Commonwealth was one of the very popular mods that came out early on, but finding some of these files, it really does kind of beg the question, why weren't they added to begin with? They again are in largely complete versions. It seems like for some reason Bethesda didn't really want to introduce or implement some of these basic versions of equipment that otherwise were replaced by some of the ballistic or energy variants. You have the basic versions, but then there was also supposed to be more in some of those canon variants. So if you go through the Minutemen questline, you will know that you can get some artillery. This is going to be done after completing the quest for Ronnie Shaw, and there's actually a few mods out there that modify this. I'm showing you in the background one of the artillery mods that you can do to turn it into a more realistic artillery piece. But either way, as I kind of mentioned earlier, this is one of the benefits of siding with the Minutemen. You do get signals that you can actually use to call this in if you have like a big fight going around with you. I've never seen anyone actually use it, but you know, it's pretty cool in concept. Well, it seems like there again wasn't just supposed to be one artillery piece, but multiple. It's not clear how you would have got these, but two of the other ones that were mentioned were a mortar, which it's not entirely clear how a mortar would differ from an artillery. Maybe it would have like a larger area effect, or one of them would do more damage, one would be an upgraded version, something like that, or wider range. There's a ton of variables you could easily modify there. But then the other one that was cut that I'm really excited for was actually a nuke. Imagine being able to set up a nuke at a settlement for one of those truly difficult fights or battles that you really just had no other alternatives to win. I think that would have been really interesting and something I would have loved to see in the game. I think the Minutemen as a whole could have had a lot more to them, maybe quests where you could upgrade their equipment and armory. It seems like that was somewhat an idea behind the scenes by us finding these things in the files of the game, but at the same time, they obviously never made the final cut, nor do we have textures or models or anything like that, so it must have been scrapped fairly early on. So to end things off, we have a pretty simple one. That's actually going to be a bunch of hidden and removed quests from the game. So for whatever reason, some of the main storylines in Fallout 4 were actually way more segmented at one point. What that means is there actually was way more quests that were involved with kind of completing the same story. There's actually a quest for Diamond City that did appear before the nuclear option where Diamond City would lose its power and you'd have to do it. In order to get to the nuclear option and progress the main story, you would actually have to help Diamond City first. There's even some other ones like the Enemy of My Enemy. This is going to be a quest that would appear after Reunions and before Dangerous Minds, two quests that are in the game right now, and it's kind of in the game. You wouldn't do anything differently. It actually just took some of the quest parts from Dangerous Minds and from Reunions and made like a totally new quest out of them. There's a few other iterations of this very thing, basically taking two quest lines that exist in the game right now, and it would have been a little bit more segmented, and you would have had instead 3 quest lines, each of them being smaller and shorter quests, but again, you having more segmentation there, maybe having a little bit more freedom because you could go and do other things in between the quests. But it seems like for at least the main story, Bethesda made an internal decision for a lot of these to actually make longer quests. We know this because a lot of these quests still do have like their triggers internally in the game. You technically are starting and completing a hidden quest. No message pops up on screen. If you look at your Pip-Boy, you're still doing that old quest, but as far as the game is concerned, you technically did finish another quest and start a new one. But yeah, that's pretty much gonna wrap it up for 10 pieces of cut content for Fallout 4. As always, I do hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you feel like I missed anything, let me know in the comments down below, as well as follow me on Twitter or check out that Amazon link if you are a college student looking for some new textbooks. Again, I thank you for watching as always, and I hope to see you guys all next time. Later.